communications has been too much of, I think it worked, or we got inches, and it's like, did anybody read it? And the answer was, I don't know. Or you get these reports that have like impressions is like 17 billion people. And you're like, no, not many people didn't read it. And also that doesn't mean anything. So I think the switch of focusing on activity to focusing on outcome. Now, I think that the function as it's matured has had to take that responsibility to be more outcome focused. And with money and with sitting at the top table and with the bigger profile, outcome focused and speaking the language of the business is critically important. But also it's put a big responsibility on the communications function to not just say it's sort of this dark art of PR that's existing over here. If it matters, measure it.
All right, brother.
Hey, Chris,
are live.
Is this thing on? Okay, good.
It is on, man. All right. So, good. Well, man, I'm super excited to be able to have this conversation with you. We've had so many great chats that weren't recorded. And, you were brilliant to kind of come up with the idea that, hey, listen, why don't we just record this and figure out what we want to do with it later? So glad to have this conversation with you. And especially because, we talk about a lot of the same things and we write content about a lot of the same subject matter on LinkedIn. But it's interesting because you have a very unique perspective, having worked internally at organizations as a head of comms and a communications executive. And I have an interesting perspective, having worked at agencies, working with people like yourself. So it's kind of like seeing things, the same thing from different angles. So I'm really excited to kind of talk about some of the stuff with you.
No, likewise. And it's funny when we were having our conversations and, we are people who met on LinkedIn, right? We kind of found each other in this community in a way that's just been really interesting. And it's one of the things that I've been learning the most about LinkedIn is how strong the community is. But we were like, we should record these conversations just because I think some other people would be interested. So I'm glad that we get a chance to do it. But yeah, the other point I was going to make as you were talking was, it's interesting watching sort of what's going on in LinkedIn too, but also just the need for and the interest for people like us that have had different experiences and sort of a seasoned tenure in communications to kind of look at some of the problems and some of the interesting opportunities there and, see how we can roll our sleeves up and how we can, partner together and partner with others to be able to kind of help to bring value in different ways to different people.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are a few different topics that are really top of mind for most companies, most executives these days that, we both could kind of add a different perspective to. And I'll just kind of go through and you can start and I'll kind of follow up. But, I think the first topic was change communications. I know that's really huge. From where you sat internally as a head of comms, talk to me about some of the challenges and the needs that you're seeing today when it comes to change communications.
Yeah, I guess if 2028 and then the pandemic, there's just kind of been, and you had a looming recession, you've had changes of leadership, you've had changes in work culture. Just if people don't understand yet the change is the new normal, then I think they're kind of missing a trick. So I think that anybody who's sat in the communications function with internally, but also in agencies and just in life, is recognizing that the whole sort of understanding of what normal was has sort of flipped upside down. And the way that I've always seen change communications is, as you're going through change, communication really is the elixir. It's the thing that makes or breaks the strategy. And if you don't have powerful communications at the heart and at the core, there's no way you're going to be able to deliver that strategy. So I think change communications at these moments of inflection, if it's a leader leaving, if it's a leadership change, if it's you're pivoting your brand proposition of your product, those are the moments that change communications, and communications in general really can help to sort of elevate, or if you get it wrong, it can really sort of mess up the ability to deliver the strategy.
Yeah. Here's the interesting thing, I think, that from my side, on the agency side, I've seen a lot of companies struggle with is how transparent to be, right? I think that in a lot of instances, when you're going through certain changes, of course, there are certain things you can't talk about, right? But I think that there are times when there are missed opportunities to be transparent, to let the rest of the team in. They're all talking, they're all speculating, right? And then you in your inner circle, you already know the answers to the questions that they're they're asking. So talk a little bit about how you've kind of dealt with how much to share and how transparent to be, and sort of what were the triggers for those decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it really depends on the subject matter, right? Because there's some things that you just can't talk about, right? And that's the nature of being a public traded company, or going through things that have sort of employment restrictions around them, or legal restrictions. But I will say is that a lot of times I think that's been the default risk profile, has been, let's start with no, as opposed to start with the possibility of yes, and figure out how we might get to a no. I think that kind of flipping the narrative and flipping the way, social media had a big impact on this, around brands needing to be more transparent, organizations needing to be more transparent, and people inside of the organization demanding it. So I think that has actually really, reframed the conversations a lot internally, which is, what do we lose by not being more transparent about this, as opposed to we shouldn't be doing that because there's too big of a risk there. So I think that risk mentality, although it's necessary in some places, has really shifted a lot, because there is a requirement in so many ways to be more transparent. I guess how have you find it, and in your world, and also with artificial intelligence being squarely in your wheelhouse, I think change communications and how folks are thinking about how technology is shaping and changing the way that people are doing stuff. I would always love your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think that's one that falls squarely into just what you said. I think that there are a lot of companies who are grappling with how to implement AI, and grappling with their AI strategy. And leadership knows the conversations that they're having and knows kind of how they're thinking about things, but the rest of the employee base doesn't. And all it does is creates a ton of anxiety. The information void will be filled with something, whether it's positive and accurate or not, typically not. And so I think that, and of course, this is a subject where there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of anxiety. A lot of people are really scared that AI and AI-powered technologies are going to take their jobs away. And for some people, that will be the case, especially if most of their job features rote tasks. But I think that the flip side of it is, there isn't a conversation that's happening in many organizations about the plans to invest in upskilling their employees, right? I mean,
Right.
I like to repeat a phrase that I've heard that I can't attribute to a specific author, but the quote goes, AI won't take your job, but someone who knows how to use AI will, right? So then how do we create a workforce of people who knows how to use AI, right? For whatever it is that they do. And it's going to look different depending on what department you're in or what function you're in, right? If you're in PR, it might look a little bit more like ChatGPT and Notion and some other tools. Certainly Copilot with the Microsoft suite. If you're in a creative team, it might look a little bit more like Firefly and Midjourney, and all of those concerns are going to be different, and all the governance issues are going to be different. And there has to be a conversation that's cross-functional and is very transparent. And I think that if the reality is that at the end of this journey, some jobs are going to be disrupted because of the efficiency gains, then there needs to be a parallel discussion of, are we just letting those people go? Are we trying to upskill those people so that they can contribute in other ways? But I think you've got to be honest about it, because, as you know, Roberto, the information is going to get out. I remember one time sitting on a call with a client, and there were about 8 or 9 people on the call, and I said, there's too many people who have this information. It's going to get out there. You can't contain it anymore. Not with 8 or 9 people on the call.
I'd be interested in your perspective of, do you think that, are people kind of putting their fingers in their ears and just kind of hoping it goes away kind of moment, or are people really leaning into this, as I agree, and we've talked about, this is the reality, whether you like it or not, the train's left the station. So where do you think kind of people are, if you were to look at a continuum of kind of on board running at 100% to not ready for it and kind of paralyzed in the midst of it?
I would say, if I had to guess, this just is not scientific at all, but if I had to guess, I'd say it's probably 30% leaning into it and 70% a little bit in denial. I think that there are a number of leaders who are playing lip service with it. One of them I spoke to a couple of weeks ago and compared AI to the metaverse, like something that the media is going to talk about a lot, but ultimately won't result in anything. And I said, I think you're sorely mistaken, my friend. So, but I think that, and I will also add to that, there are some leaders whose conclusion is that it will mostly impact junior level staffers because they do a lot of the implementation. They do a lot of rote tasks. And so some of these leaders feel like, okay, well, tasks like media monitoring, social media monitoring, clip reports, things like that, those are going to be disrupted by AI. So maybe we're going to need fewer junior people. And I think that's the wrong way to look at things, right? Because the flip side of it is, okay, well, if these junior people, if AI can take 2 or 3 hours of those rote tasks off their hands, now you're freeing up more brain power, right? To be able to look at other problems. Because the other challenge I see in the industry is that, whether you talk about AI, whether you talk about some of the issues that you talked about, the continuing issues surrounding the post-pandemic return to office, societal issues, social justice issues, et cetera, those are all things that land on the desks of people like yourself and others. And I think, I'm sure you probably would agree, I think folks dealing with those issues would love to have more brain power focused on it, right?
Exactly. Well, it was funny. I joined a chief communications officer forum that I'm a part of, and everybody was going around the room and explaining what it is they do. And it was like, I do events, I do internal comms, I do ESG, I do DE&I, I do, and it was just the CSR, I do PR. And it was just the growing list of the resumes of the people in the room where, one, there's a bandwidth question, right? Because, you've got a lot of stuff that comms in a really good way is sitting at the top table now and further up the production line, having these conversations as opposed to being in kind of packaging and delivering. But, in order to be able to achieve our jobs, when you have that breadth and scale of a responsibility and a remit, you're going to need powerful tools to help you do it. So actually being able to think sort of like, how is that an enabler for me to be able to do this, to continue to succeed, to offer the best reputational brand advice I possibly can to my organization. I think that flipping that narrative is actually a way that could really help to sort of add fuel and oxygen to it, as opposed to fear and paralysis.
I agree 100%. My mantra is always, AI is a co-pilot. It shouldn't do your job for you. It can't do your job for you, but it should help you be more efficient and help you save an hour here or there, right? Because look, I use AI tools. You use AI tools. It's great to have them to be able to help you, but what they put out is not finished. It's not great, right? You have to take it the extra mile and make it great, or even make it just ready for public consumption, even if it's just something standard. But you can't use what it gives you. And I don't know how much better it's going to get, since it's trained on everything up till 2021. What's it going to learn in the next 2 years that's going to make it autonomous, that it doesn't need humans, right? So I think you're 100% right. I still think we're not having the conversations that we need to be having. I think we're having just a slice of the conversations that we need to be having. And I think that has to change. I was on a panel for PR Daily a couple of hours ago, and I said, well, I'll say now, which is that ChatGPT and all these other generative AI tools flooded the market early this year and just really kind of turned the world on an ear. So I kind of feel like 2023 was very much a figure it out year, but 2024 is going to have to be we're going to have to get buttoned up.
Yeah, no, and everybody keeps trying to make 2023 be the year of Taylor Swift and Barbie. And I think we're all we're trying to have fun. We're really trying to make this year count. I think a lot of people are feeling the pain of, I'm cleaned out my closet now. And I'm like, okay, now I have to put everything back in and decide, do I keep this shirt? Do I give it to Goodwill? What do I do? So I think that realization, now that we're in September, has really sunk in. But also, I think that as communicators, it's really important to kind of think about where our customers, where our employees are, sort of how we're engaging and interacting with each other, where the market is. because it really kind of isn't this, we made it through year. I think it's just that, to your point, a reset, recalibrate, rethink, and the fallout from the pandemic, and in good and bad, it has not shaken out yet. And so everybody's like, when are we going to figure out the remote working hybrid situation? It's like, not yet. I mean, some millennials and Gen Zs have already figured out what they want to do. But that said, is that, and a lot of other people, to be fair, but there's still a lot of figuring out what the new normal is going to look like. And I think 2023 actually put a big light on that. Like, it's not what it's going to be in the past, but we haven't quite figured out yet what it's going to be in the future.
No, I think that's a great point. Well, so I want to jump over to another topic, which I know
Sure.
we both talk a lot about, and I wanted to talk about executive leadership and positioning. And before we even dive into that, I just want to mention, just earlier today, you launched a brand new playbook, which looks fantastic. Hey. So if you wouldn't mind just talking a little bit about the playbook, and then talk a little bit about, from your perspective as a head of comms and a senior communications professional, just how important leadership positioning and thought leadership is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for the shout out. I will take that and run with it. So a shout out from Chris is always one that I appreciate. But yeah, no, it's interesting because I've been studying LinkedIn for about 5 months now. And as a lot of us have been, and I think, you've got X or Twitter or X, you've got Facebook, they're having a little bit of a spat, right? And LinkedIn's just kind of been this steady engine in the background that's just been really sort of sneaking up from behind and eating a bit of their lunch. But also you've got, Gen Zs and millennials that are out there that are, much more public about using social media, much more digital first friendly, but also they're really thinking in a different way of bringing kind of the magic of Instagram and other platforms into LinkedIn. And you're starting to see that with the video content, with people showing their personalities, and plus the breakdown of professional and personal happening. I think that people are more able and wanting to talk about who they are as a person to build out who they are as a professional as well. So that's just really interesting. It's a really interesting moment for LinkedIn. And you're seeing a lot of people that, and all due respect to them because they're doing an awesome job, that are sort of solo entrepreneurs. They're earlier in their career and they're jumping on the LinkedIn bandwagon. And, they've gone from 0 to 90,000 followers in like a matter of months, which just says white space opportunity. But the thing that I think that they're missing, and I think one of the ingredients that we bring to this table in a bit of a gap, is the communications know-how and experience, right? If you come in, we can look at it not just of how does the tool work and how do you build your followers, but we're looking at it from how do executives position themselves? And it's LinkedIn, but it's much broader. It's 360, it's awards, it's presentations, it's speeches, it's how you show up to your employee base, name your stakeholder groups, name your tune. But I think that's where the playbook sort of genesis came from. And I've sort of broken it down of kind of step by step how you would go through that process, from defining your personal brand and what your purpose is, to figuring out your profile, which sounds sort of nuts and bolts, but obviously we know that really matters, to your content strategy, your engagement strategy, and to making sure that you are really participating actively on the platform. So that's what the playbook does. I think I've got a lot of good response so far, which is awesome. But so we'll see where that goes. But I think that there's a big opportunity, not just for people like us in comms to be really harnessing the power of LinkedIn, but for executives, no matter what level you're at, but especially if you're more senior or you're looking for a job. I think this is a real way when somebody Googles your name, the first thing that comes up is probably your LinkedIn. And if they go to a dead page, who is that serving? That's your landing page. So really make it count. So that's my diatribe on it, but you can tell I'm really passionate about it. But I know that you've also very similarly been in a similar journey. So I appreciate understanding your perspective on it.
Yeah, it's interesting because from my side as an agency exec, and I've been counseling executives and senior executive CEOs, the whole nine, on their thought leadership and online presence for over a decade. And but I never really did it myself. And you'll appreciate this. There's sort of like an unwritten rule in PR that you're never supposed to be the story. right? You're
Right.
supposed to be, so for years, you and I have been that person kind of whispering in the ear off the, outside of the view of the camera,
Right.
cropped out of the, whispering into the executive's ear, telling them this or that or whatever. So I think it's even less natural for PR pros to put themselves out there, for one.
Right.
So I think, so it was an interesting journey for me. Now, what really kind of got me started was I was running a relatively new business that I started a few years ago when I first came to Edelman, corporate digital. So, I was the first employee, and I got 14, 15 other people to join me, and we started up a practice, right? And so the challenge for me within such a sprawling matrixed organization like Edelman was to really be able to evangelize. I do all these meet and greets and all this kind of stuff, but you could never really get everybody. I mean, the most senior people didn't show up to the the all staff calls, and all that kind of thing. And you can only do but so many one-on-ones with an agency with thousands of people globally. So I said, you know what? Maybe try LinkedIn. And so I started posting more often to LinkedIn, and really the Edelman employee base kind of became my biggest employee base. I mean, my biggest audience, so,
right.
So rather than something that I may have shared during a presentation, during a meeting or an all staff or something like that, if I would put something up on LinkedIn, more people would come up to me in the halls or, in the kitchen or whatever and say, oh, hey, that was really interesting what you posted. Can you talk to my team about that? So that was kind of the impetus. That was the aha moment for me and you brought up a good point. I think that in the past, people would look at LinkedIn as, okay, well, I don't need to touch my LinkedIn profile until I'm ready to look for another job. Right. And I think that they missed the opportunity that you can position yourself within the company you currently work for using LinkedIn. Right. Because it's more than likely that more people are going to see what you post on LinkedIn than anything you put on the company intranet.
Right. It's funny because I've been with CEOs and C-suite leaders where we're going through the LinkedIn right on a shared screen, and there's you have to learn the platform, right? And but the moment of pushing the button to post is like this panic-induced moment of like, but what if it's a little wrong? And I think that for me has been the most sort of freeing moment. I sort of say always just start by posting once a week. It's like the gym. Once you start going, you're going to look better and you're going to want to go more. But having I have the perfect strategy, I have the perfect thing to say. I know you could just start posting and just getting out there, and you start to learn about what people are interested, what you really can write freely about and write often about. But for me, it's like that atrophy of I don't know if I could do it, or I'm a little bit afraid of showing myself. But once you start going, I mean, the amount of people that reach out, and I'm sure this happens to you regularly too, that have never posted on anything, that have never liked anything. And, either it's a lead or it's, oh my gosh, I shared that and took a screenshot and sent it to my husband or my wife, that actually you're reaching a ton of people and they're really paying attention to it. But it's just getting over that inertia of, I don't have anything to say. Nobody's going to want to hear it. Or what if I say the wrong thing? I mean, obviously use common sense, but you wouldn't be in the roles that you're in if you weren't using common sense. But I just think that there's a really interesting watching people kind of go through that journey, which I've also been through myself, where, it's kind of one of those things where now if you're not playing the game, you're going to get left behind a little bit too, where I'm like, you really kind of need to be on LinkedIn in a sort of more aggressive way as an executive if you really want to build out your personal brand. There's just no other way around it.
Absolutely right. And I think that's a common set of fears that hold most people back. Since leaving Edelman, I've been working with a couple of executives on their thought leadership and executive visibility. And that's exactly the place where we start. It's almost like coaching, right? It's almost kind of like getting them unstuck, because it's, what are people going to think? They're going to think that this is stupid. People are going to say, why is he or she, why are they posting this stuff? Who cares? Nobody's going to like it. All of those. And, the reality is the fear that's holding them back. And the other reality is that, like, those things almost never happen. Right? It's I don't think I can think of one time, like I said, I've been doing this for over a decade. I can't think of one time where an executive said, yep, 10 people reached out to me, DM me and said, this is stupid. Why are you writing this?
Right.
Instead it's, wow, this is very insightful. I had a very similar experience too. I'm so glad you shared that. It makes you feel more relatable, makes you feel more human. And I think that there's been enough research showing that that's what people are looking for. So whether it's customers that you're trying to attract for biz dev or lead generation, or it's consumers who buy a product of yours or whatever, I think now more than ever, consumers and customers feel like they want to know more about the brands and the people behind those brands that they're spending their money with. And they can really love a brand, but really hate the people behind it, right? And we've seen some of those issues with a lot of household name brands lately.
Yeah, I mean, and CEO is the figurehead of the brand, right? So for me, it'll be really interesting watching how this style moves. As sort of LinkedIn continues to grab tentacles into things, which I think it is and will continue to go that direction. But also, as different generations of leaders continue to move into the C-suite and up into different roles, I think that they were born with there's that famous video of a baby trying to flip the iPhone like a magazine like an iPhone, where it's these people were born with iPhones and with iPads in their hands, where I just think that this is going to be such first nature that we're going to see this continue to go in that direction. I don't see any other way through it.
100%. I would say, I remember 10 years ago, there was a stat that said something along the lines of 5 or 10% of Fortune 500 CEOs were using LinkedIn or even had a LinkedIn profile. And in the intervening 10 years, that number has grown dramatically. I don't know where it is today, but it's significantly higher. It's gone from a nice to have and something that only the really forward-looking executives did to it's pretty much table stakes. And even if you're not interested yourself, you'll have a team that creates your presence for you and maintains it for you. So I agree with you. I think that there's all kinds of opportunity. And I can honestly say, just anecdotally, these conversations got a lot easier. So I'd say maybe 4 or 5 years ago. It went from like kicking and screaming, and the board said you have to do it, so you have to do it, to them reaching out to me or reaching out to our the firms that I've worked for and saying, hey, I'm ready, right? For a variety of reasons. And the other thing I'll say too is that a lot of senior leaders, and I've seen this in the last few years, start doing sort of like wanting to do these executive positioning programs to position themselves for their next job, right? And I've seen that even with CEOs, where they know, okay, you know what, I'm only going to be in this role for another couple of years. I'm auditioning and positioning myself for my next gig, whether that's board member, philanthropist, investor, whatever it might be.
Yeah, there was a joke which some comms and house folks would have, is when an executive comes and asks to be on a TED Talk, that they might be leaving soon. But there was truth there. But it's not just about finding your next job, right? It's building equity in the brand. It's building equity in your personal brand. To your point, it's building equity in the product. It's engaging your employees. I mean, there's some when I was at HSBC, there was several leaders that just use it almost as their intranet platform. They're posting pictures in retailers, they're going around to stores and they're liking and calling people out. And, to see your name in lights when you're an employee from your regional director or your CEO, it just gives you this buoyancy in a different way than it does on your intranet, but also it's reinforcing to the brand. So I think there's a lot of ways to use it, but it's really interesting watching when people do it well, the magic that can come out of it.
I agree. There are some executives, CEOs I've seen who, for every one, they don't post that often, but they comment a lot, and they congratulate team members a lot. And I agree with you. That's another strategy, really basically an employee engagement strategy that you can use on LinkedIn. Now you have to, obviously do it in a measured way. You don't want it to be creepy, but at the same time, I think that there are different ways to skin the cat. And it starts with really understanding how you want to show up, what you want to get out of it. and then working backwards to what that strategy should look like. But you're right. I think that it's just an abundance of opportunity. And I also saw it, and this was bared out. I mean, they weren't terribly scientific, but I've done a couple of polls since the whole Twitter X. I refuse to call it X. Since the whole
I can't do it either. I can't bring myself.
Yeah, since the whole thing went down at Twitter, I've done a couple of polls just to ask people if they're spending more time on LinkedIn and investing more on LinkedIn as a result of all the turmoil at Twitter. And overwhelmingly, the answer was yes. So again, it was a small sample size, hardly scientific, but I think it does tend to support what we've all just kind of seen with our eyes, right? There's a lot more movement. There are a lot more creators. There's a lot more content, and there's a much wider variety of content on the platform than there ever was before. So, and even having said that, LinkedIn I don't think they've even passed 1 billion total users yet, right? So it's still relatively small compared to sort of the Metas and Instagrams and TikToks of the world. So you can still gain traction. You can still, organic is still a thing on LinkedIn, where it's really not a thing on some of the bigger platforms.
Right. That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's great. I think you and I could talk about this for hours, which I love. But I think we had a last topic of optimizing communications function. Why don't you take that one first?
Yeah, I think that you mentioned it before. When you say communications, there was a time when I first started my career back in the Flintstone days where PR was press releases and media relations, and now, and you kind of rattled down the list, we're talking those things, but we're also talking events. We're talking government relations, stakeholder relations, right? And there's an aspect of it that delves into recruitment and retention, lead generation, social media, all of those things. And I think that the challenge is that, unlike some other functions, let's say, for instance, marketing, where there's a really robust and long-standing ecosystem, within MarTech, that really is able to look at the functions and look at the needs and look at the stacks and all of those things. I think that is not as well developed within communications. Right. And just given all of the challenges that communications faces today, and the challenges that communications is going to face tomorrow and beyond, I think that needs to change very quickly. I think it needs to change on the consultant side, in terms of agencies, consulting firms, et cetera, who work with communicators internally and everything, and help to really kind of provide an outside perspective. But I think it also has to happen internally. I think there has to be more conversation, more innovation, more open conversations about the comms function and about optimizing it. And I think, honestly, and I'm sure you probably would have a lot to say about this, I think there has to be more investment. From an agency pro perspective, I can honestly say that almost every corporation that I've worked with, they invest probably by multiples of 10 or 20 more money into marketing than they do into communication. And it's not even close. It's not even close. The communications function barely has a budget, right? And the marketing folks have more money than they know what to do. Literally, sometimes than they know what to do with.
Right. So. And it was always a joke for me of, talking to my team, go make friends with marketing, because you're a rounding error in a 1% of their marketing sort of collateral that they're doing. But I do think that, marketing and comms, and I grew up in a marketing sort of lens of communications and sort of consumer communications, but also with sort of working and reporting into marketing and other areas where it's actually then forced us. Now, I do think that we should hold our own pot of money and be able to sort of use it and leverage it, but that kind of having to work together to make sure that we were aligning so that the right hand wasn't over here talking about something in a press release and the left hand was over here talking about a campaign. And then you see these two social media posts go up and you'd be like, well, they're clearly not talking to one another. So that actually was sort of a benefit of it. But back to the point around, giving a pot of money to communications, and a growing pot of money. I think that it's money in terms of sort of ability to do things like get influencers and right. So like the day of let's have a press conference or just put out another press release about it. I mean, or the power of your Rolodex, which is really important. Like those are important tools we have in our toolkit, but our toolkit is growing. And we've got to not only be able to be a lot more proactive, like jumping into the news cycle, right? Like, if Mars did something where somebody shot up to the moon and Mars within a dime turned around and could talk about their product in the middle of that conversation. And so having a nimble communications team, but also having the budget and kind of the ability and the skills to be able to jump on opportunities when they present themselves and to think longer term and sort of in a more proactive engagement way for ways for us to be out there in the market using our communications expertise in a way that a lot of marketing folks don't have, but sort of figuring out that sweet spot of how do we partner together to be able to kind of really push the brand forward. So I think that's a big one. The other one I'll say, and I know you'll have a lot to say about it, which is why I'm kind of prompting you on it too, is, communications has been too much of, I think it worked, or we got inches and it's like, did anybody read it? And the answer was, I don't know. Or you get these reports that have like impressions is like 17 billion people. And you're like, no, not many people didn't read it. And also that doesn't mean anything. So I think the switch of focusing on activity to focusing on outcome. Now, I think that the function as it's matured has had to take that responsibility to be more outcome focused. And with money and with sitting at the top table and with the bigger profile, outcome focused and speaking the language of the business is critically important. But also it's put a big responsibility on the communications function to not just say it's sort of this dark art of PR that's existing over here. If it matters, measure it. And I think the industry is pretty far behind right now in being able to really figure out how do we talk about impact and outcomes, not we published it, all the way to did it change the way somebody thought about the issue we want them to change their thought about. So I think that really investing in that area is not only going to make what we do sharper, it's going to give us a bigger seat at the table and really demonstrate the value we bring, which goes back to getting more budget.
Yes, listen, you are preaching to the choir. I've thought for the longest time that there was too much focus on output and not enough focus on outcome. However, on the other side, I suspect that in a lot of conversations about ROI, what's really behind the curtain is the desire to say no. And, I think a lot of times people, because you can, if you really want to, you can figure out how to measure what you want to measure, right? But sometimes I think I've seen executive leaders throw up ROI, throw up measurement as a way to say, okay, well, I don't want to do something. Because yes, you can, I think that, because there's the famous quote about advertising that 50% of my advertising spend is wasted. I just don't know which 50%, right?
So, exactly.
And that's not stopped one company from pouring millions of dollars into advertising, right?
Yeah.
So the measurement is flawed there too. The other thing I'll say is that, yes, I think there are plenty of outcomes that you can measure within communications, but you can't measure everything. I mean, case in point, Roberto, a lot of times your job or my job was to stop things from getting out there. Stop things from getting into the public, into social media and driving mentions and media hits and things like that. How do you quantify that? It's almost kind of like you mentioned earlier about going to the gym. How do you measure the ROI of going to the gym? How do you measure the ROI of being able to move more freely, be healthier, to have lower blood pressure, all of those and to live another 20 years? So how do you measure that? You can measure some of those things, but you can't measure all of it. But we all know intuitively that we need to do that. It's going to benefit us. So, I think that yes, I think the function could help itself by coming up with better ways to measure outcomes and not focus on outputs and activity. But I think that the C-suite has to understand that there are that there is a value to having a well-functioning communications function, and many of those things are going to be measurable and some of those things won't be. And I think that you've got to invest in it no matter what.
Yeah, I agree. You can't measure the icebergs that you didn't hit. And, in PR, we're dodging a lot of icebergs on a daily basis. I will say too, though, that, a lot of people in equal ways of saying we should do it because it felt good will say the thing that we shouldn't do because they think it's good. So, I think that what's happened when being in an in-house role is that all the pet projects, all the things that people kind of want to do, or they're interested in doing, or they want to do this event, or they want to publish this story, depending on their seniority, depending on where they are in the organization, sometimes those things get rubber stamped or they get agreed to go. And what it does is it crowds out so much of the other things that you could be doing that are going to bring a lot bigger value to the organization and to the brand and to building out the brand equity, that I think otherwise you're kind of picking a fight with a leader, right? Which you never want to do, versus kind of trying to figure out the most academic way and the most data-driven way of why this is so clearly the right answer, where if I have 10 pennies, I should put 9 towards this because you're asking me to spend 5 on this thing. That I think the more that we can talk with evidence-based understanding to being able to not just, to your point, stop the work that shouldn't be happening, but also then quantify the value that we deliver. I know there's not going to be perfect answers. We're not going to get to the panacea on this, but trying to get to a place where we can speak that language better, I think is really going to help to stop us from low value work and let us lean into the stuff that really matters.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I might be a little biased because I'm an agency pro, but I can say that there have been many times where we'd be sitting down with executive leaders at a brand and talking about this very thing, right? We're gonna put together this program for you. We're gonna work with you, and we're gonna implement this measurement system. And I got to say, 8 times out of 10, they say no because they don't want to spend the money, right? So that's the other side too, is that it's not fair to starve financially the communications function because you can't quantify their impact on the organization. So you're going to deny budget, and at the same time, not allocate budget to be able to properly measure. I mean, I've had Fortune 500 companies say no to a $15,000 brand lift survey when they're spending $5 million on media. You don't want to spend 15 grand to find out what the aided or unaided awareness.
You're like, hey, I think can I ask that question one more time in a different way to see if you'll change your opinion? I hear you.
It's mind-boggling. So so I think that those are again conversations. Again, I feel like, and me, I'm the eternal optimist. It feels like it's getting better. When you talked about buddying up and becoming friends with the marketing team, I remember a client I had, a retail client, about 5 or 6 years ago. I was working mostly with the comms folks they had zero budget, and this is like a big household name retailer. And so I remember going in a meeting and strategizing with my the comms leader I was working with at the time, and we met with a couple of their colleagues in marketing. And so we made our pitch, and here's what the value is and all this kind of stuff. And thankfully they were nodding heads for the marketing folks. And they just looked at each other and said, well, okay, what do you guys need? 100 grand? And you say, we're just coming for 100 grand, right? They're like, well, why don't we just take one sign out of the stores? Okay, there we go. Take one sign that probably everybody's going to walk past anyway. That's 100 grand to be able to do this initiative that the comms folks wanted to do. So
it's great. It's getting better. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I think that it's interesting too, because the number of people you have on your team, right? There's, besides the sort of sense of land grabbing, which I never had, right? Which has always been, let's get the work done and let's do it in the right way. But there's ways to get work done. And I think communications folks have been really crafty because we haven't had the budgets of, how do you do a dotted line into something, right? They might not report to me, but I can sort of help to, I think it also adds elasticity to the organization to, get the foundations done, get the table stakes done, and sort of make sure you're fit for the future, but be creative about the ways in which you have influence across the organization to get stuff done. But also there's people with different skill sets across the organization that could really be working with you in a way that kind of amplifies your ability. Now, because if you don't get to the North Star of, give me $100 million, right, which I don't think we're going to get there tomorrow, to, kind of seeing where do you place your bets on the things that you really need, but then also kind of being inventive and sort of strategic in the way that you're building out the function in a way that you can still achieve the outcomes you're trying to achieve and need to achieve, but it might not all sit into your reporting line. And so I think that's going to be increasingly important as we jump into other things of how are we organizing ourselves in a matrix way, but really thinking about resources beyond this is mine and that is yours to this is the problem set we have. How are we going to organize our people that we have around it to make sure we deliver it?
Absolutely. Couldn't say it better. Well, look, we could do this all day long.
I know.
So I'm going to put it in the show notes, but where can people find you?
They can find me on my LinkedIn page, which is Roberto Munoz. Oh, it's Roberto J. Munoz is my LinkedIn. But Roberto Munoz, find me there. Yep.
And your website, you want to do your URL as well?
URL is not there. It's coming out next week. So maybe it'll be there at the time we can put it into the post. So more to come, but thanks for giving me the precursor of being able to say that I'm launching my website.
I'm working on mine too, so it's all good. All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Good chatting.